All that ahead, but first, companies registering new or converted chauffeured private hire cars must hold on to their vehicles for at least 3 years. The Land Transport Authority says the previous flexibility to allow these vehicles to be sold for other purposes may lead to supply volatility. Now, the new rule is aimed at maintaining a stable vehicle supply for ride-hailing services. Claudia Lim reports.
Chauffeured private hire cars, or CPHCs, are used for ride-hailing service platforms like Grab, Gojek and Tada. One industry player says the impact on leasing companies will vary depending on the type of cars in the fleet. The vehicles in Velocity Leasing's fleet were already meant to run for more than 3 years.
Given our model where we are only EV, EV inherently hold better long-term value, having low running costs, and we also enjoy the early adoption incentives from the government. So this is why we can hold our vehicles much longer.
However, Mr. Lim highlighted the potential challenges for other fleets using internal combustion engines. He says such firms have a greater incentive to sell and make a profit on their vehicles when market conditions are good. The lock-in period will apply to vehicles registered or converted as CPHCs by businesses and those transferred from individuals to companies. Individuals and self-driven PHCs will not be subjected to the new rule. Existing businesses that already own and operate CPHCs are also exempt. One market observer says it remains to be seen if the new move could impact fare prices.
There should be actually increase in supply and to match the demand, and therefore maybe to the consumers the fare will become much more balanced. But on the other hand, we also have another factor whereby there is a lock-in period cost which is yet to be estimated that may be actually be transferred to the consumers.
The announcement of the rule was originally planned after February's COE bidding exercise was completed. It was brought forward before the exercise closed due to an unintended release of information by an LTA vendor.
So let's dive a little deeper, shall we, on LTA's move. And for that, I'm joined by transport analyst, Associate Professor Walter Theseira. He is from the School of Business at the Singapore University of Social Sciences. Welcome, Prof. Thanks for joining us. First of all, we heard there that it was the aim is to, manage the supply. What's prompted this change? Was there a trend that you could identify that led to this LTA move now?
Sure. So I think we first have to take a step back and look at what happens in the market when you order a car from a ride-hail service. That car could come from a taxi pool or from the private hire vehicle pool. And they're actually regulated differently. Taxi numbers are regulated directly. But for private hire numbers, basically today, the companies are allowed to convert private vehicles to private hire use, but they're also allowed to convert them back as they wish. And here's the issue with that. The issue has been that in recent years, we've actually had a very high run-up in COE prices. And what it has meant is from time to time, there may have been some vehicle fleet operators in the market who decided to buy some private hire vehicles thinking that they had this option of always selling them back to the private market if they couldn't find enough rental demand. And in some cases, they may have even been able to make a profit from doing so if they bought it before the run-up in COE prices. And basic point is this isn't a very good practice from the point of view of supply stability, because it means that those private hire vehicles could be in or out of the market at any point in time. You don't really know when. And it also contributes to COE volatility possibly as well. So those, I think, were the concerns here.
So with this mandatory 3-year lock-in for business-owned private hire cars, we anticipate that it will stabilize the supply of cars for ride-hailing services alone. Will it?
Okay, so I think it's a situation where basically the intent is to encourage the fleet operators to consider more carefully what the demand is going to be like for their services, for the vehicles, over a medium-term period, about 3 or 4 years or so. That's the idea here. Because I think what we want to avoid is a kind of a feast or famine situation where either operators add a lot of vehicles, which could be destabilizing, or equivalently, they dispose of a huge number of vehicles when they see that the value of those vehicles as private cars is higher. And it's this lack of stability which actually makes the market problematic because from the driver point of view, it could also mean that availability of cars to rent can go up and down, prices go up and down. At the end of the day, for commuters as well, that could lead to supply instability and, getting a ride.
Okay, well explained, but there's still a lot of question marks surrounding this, particularly when it comes to price, because ride-hailing prices have been quite high, recently. Will this new rule impact fares and how?
Sure. So I don't think the intent of the rule is actually to target ride-hailing prices directly. And the reason why I say that is ride-hailing prices and taxi fares in Singapore are actually deregulated, meaning that it's not the government's job to decide, whether the fare should be high or low. And that is because the fares actually have to balance what the commuters want out of the market, as well as what's a livable wage for the drivers. And that's a very tricky thing, I think, for the government to decide. So when you have the current situation, so I think in today's market, even though commuters, for example, complain about high fares, the reality is that the drivers are not actually taking home extraordinary profits. I think the median wage for drivers most recently reported is below the national median wage, meaning that it's not such an attractive job. And so what that means is if the prices, aren't high enough to attract drivers, you won't get a higher supply, and that means the prices will remain elevated. It's only if you get more drivers into the market that you might see some easing off of the fares and so on. But right now, that's not the case. So, coming back to this move, right? It's not about saying that the price level should be a certain amount. It's about creating the market conditions so that drivers, commuters, the platforms as well, face a more stable supply of the vehicles. And that will, I think, help the market, work better.
I understand the mechanics, but speaking for our viewers out there who really want to know what they can expect from the prices of their Grab, Gojek or Tada rides, can you give them some kind of range, perhaps, if the supply is indeed less volatile?
Yeah, so I think that's actually an impossible question to answer because at the end of the day, right, again, the prices have to do a good job of matching supply and demand. I mean, let me give you an example of why that would be an issue. So suppose you go into the market and you say, you know what, I think prices are too high. Many commuters obviously would feel that. And you try to intervene as best you can to bring the prices down. What we have to remember is that the main beneficiary of your ride-hailing price or fare is actually your driver. It isn't actually the platform, So the driver is the one who takes home the majority of the fare. They pay a commission, they pay the operating costs, of course. What we could possibly do, in terms of policy, government, and so on, is we can try to make sure this market works transparently. We can try to bring down unnecessary cost factors in leasing and so on. But at the end of the day, if the fares don't support a driver's livelihood, nobody wants to drive. So that's why I think I would caution if you just act to bring down fares, for example, and it doesn't support drivers' livelihoods, drivers are going to quit and then you cannot get a ride. That will be the problem.
Okay, so we talked about drivers, talk about passengers. Let's talk about the fleet owners.
Sure.
Okay, the people that are selling and converting their cars in the open market. What was their motivation? Was it profit or was it a case of just trying to balance the age of their fleet, whether it's a EV car or not?
Okay, so I think for the fleet operators, actually there's a very large range of operators in the market. There are very large operators which may also have taxi as well as private hire fleets. And there are also micro operators who only have a handful of vehicles and rent them out. And I think there were different considerations in the market. If you were a very large operator, your main consideration actually was how do you balance your capital between taxi fleets and between private hire fleets? And what has been happening in the last couple of years has been those operators have been choosing to downscale their taxi fleets, shift more to the ride-hailing fleets because of the flexibility. It's because when you get a taxi, you're locked in for the entire lifespan of the taxi. You cannot convert it to private use. If you made a mistake, that's it. But with the private hire fleets, there was a lot of flexibility. If you couldn't rent them out, you could try to sell them on the market for private cars. So that flexibility was really key, and it's why private hire fleets were expanding so rapidly and taxi fleets were, downscaling. So at the end of the day, they want to make money, and there are two sources of revenue. You rent out the private hire vehicle, or if rentals are flat, you try to sell it to a private consumer. And what's going on with this particular move is now we're just cutting off that option to sell it to a private consumer at least within the first 3 years. So if you're expanding your fleet, you had better be sure that you think there's demand to rent it at least for 3 years or so. That's what the move is about.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there for now. We'll see where things settle in a few months and maybe have you back then. Thanks so much for your input today. I've been speaking with Associate Professor Walter Theseira from SUSS.